Hi guys, I want to talk about Prince Harry and Meghan Markle and why I believe the British public have never really taken and continue to lose support for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Now, this is going to be looking at their relationship via the archetype they essentially hold, the Prince Princess archetype. Now, Meghan Markle isn't a princess, she's a duchess, but for all intents and purposes, she fulfills the archetype of a princess. She's married to a prince, she's had this big fairy tale wedding, she lives a life of power, of privilege. The princess archetype essentially works, and when you step into the shoes in a public position in an archetypal role, the public expects certain behaviours from you. The archetypal ideas are deeply ingrained into society. This has come through evolution over, a hierarchical structure has existed in human society as long as human societies have been around and even before. So humans know how hierarchies work. They know if you have this prince, princess near the top of the hierarchy, in a hugely influential and powerful family, or at least were until they've almost self-ejected themselves from this role, the public, not just the British public, but I think the worldwide public as well, expects certain behaviours, certain things from you that you need to fulfil to be accepted by the public, and that is just essentially stepping into the shoes of the archetype that we expect from you. This is encoded into us, I believe, at a genetic level, at a cultural level. It's not something that's going to change overnight. Now, when you apply the archetype, these archetypes are developed over tens of thousands of years. It may appear sexist when you apply the archetype. I don't believe it is, because if Prince Harry had been born female, a princess, and we saw someone with Meghan Markle's personality traits step into, say, a Princess Harry's life, I think the public would still expect certain things from that person. So say Meghan Markle was a man, Prince Harry was a woman, and Meghan Markle behaved and influenced a male Meghan Markle influence over a female Princess Harry in the way that she does. It's a complicated structure to kind of get when you say it, but I think the public would reject it as well. So I don't believe this is about feminism or sexism. It's just when you step into the archetypal shoes, there's certain behaviours you need to follow, and one of the reasons I think the British public are rejecting Meghan Markle is because she does not follow the archetypal protocols which are expected from her. Now, the British public connected in a way prior to Meghan Markle walking into Harry's life. The British public and global public connected with Harry in a way that probably hasn't been seen for a very, very long time, at least in the more modern media era of daily newspapers, coloured magazines, where everything's glossy, it's amazing pictures, and then in later years social media and YouTube videos. Prince Harry connected like no one else. His parents divorced in 1996 after like a long, lengthy kind of bitter breakup. His mother, Princess Diana, died in 1997, and we had the famous images of Prince William, Prince Harry walking behind the hearse at the funeral, and that gave the public a real connection with young Harry at a very, very early age. Now, as this prince archetype develops and subsequently falls apart, we can see how Harry was made into a hero. So the best hero stories start with someone that's maybe a little bit broken, a little bit vulnerable, and they build themselves up. They build themselves up into this. They conquer their adversity, and they build themselves up into this big character that the nation loves. And Prince Harry did that. He did that well. In his teenage years, there were periods where he made mistakes, but I believe in the long term that only made the public love Harry more. He used to be a bit of a rowdy lad. Essentially, he would go out drinking in the posh areas of London. There were stories of him, and pictures of him, getting into scrapes with cameramen, throwing punches, getting drunk. He lived a pretty normal lad especially for that time period. culture that I think the public really liked. He wasn't overly clean cut. He was a person you really could relate to. There was controversies. He went to a fancy dress party dressed in Africa Corps Nazi uniform, which the tabloids love to jump on that. That was probably a very poor PR move. But in the long term, people see Harry as just an honest person. Yeah, he's not overly filtered. He does stuff. He makes mistakes. But the public really connected with that. Now, in the years when the archetypal prince hero really developed, is when Prince Harry joined the army. Now, he's probably the only prince or direct royal in hundreds of years to have killed the enemy in combat. Now, I personally don't believe in the Iraq War, the Afghan War. I think those were huge mistakes. But Harry was a gunner in an Apache helicopter. He's on record as essentially saying, out in those wars, I killed people. And you're going to do that. If you fly an Apache gunship in the battlefield, you're almost certainly going to kill people. That's unavoidable. He is the guy on the switch, pressing the trigger. And that's really where the full... This is the height of Prince Harry's popularity. This is when he's really peak Prince Warrior archetype, because now he has ascended this rough start to life that he's had. No one would want that, even though he's this privileged prince. It's a bit of a gilded cage because his mum's died at a very early age. He's all this media scrutiny on him, and now he's ascended to this officer rank in the British Army, helicopter gunship operator, out there flying the deserts, engaging in combat with the enemy. That's something that it's just almost hard to get your head around in 21st century UK, that a prince, a grandson of the Queen, is out there killing the enemy on the battlefield. Whether you don't have to believe in the wars or not, the wars were nonsense, but still the warrior mentality doesn't matter. The warrior doesn't really care about the politics of the war they're involved in. The warrior is just going onto the battlefield and doing their duty. You don't have to believe in the war, but Prince Harry ascended that and essentially became the full warrior archetype prince, and the public more or less just fell in love with that. They fell in love with this Harry that was just brave, was honourable, but you could also connect with him. And I think the people in the army loved that. The general public loved that. Just this was peak Prince Harry. Everybody loved it. Now, when Meghan Markle walks into Harry's life, things take very much of a different turn. Meghan Markle really doesn't fill the princess archetypal role. Now, this is where you get a little bit into people saying it's sexism. It's really not. It's just these archetypes. There's certain expectations. There's certain things that people are just going to innately want from the archetype. And Meghan Markle is a divorcee. She obviously isn't a virgin. In the fairy tale archetypes, people want this princess that's virginal, that's clean, untouched. Now, obviously, she doesn't need to actually be that, but she almost needs to step into it and fulfill that role almost at an illusionary level. But she doesn't do that because she's already been married, obviously not a virgin, and people can accept that. But being a divorcee, it makes the archetype more harder to accept by the general public, I believe. Now, Meghan Markle appears to be an overbearing person as well. She takes Prince Harry down a very politically activist road. Prince Harry loves hunting. He loves doing all his kind of laddish British Army stuff, at least at the time. He gives up the hunting. He does more and more things to essentially comply with the wishes of Meghan Markle. Now, there's nothing wrong with keeping your wife happy, but when you're stepping into the prince archetypal shoes, your grandson to the Queen, people expect you to be able to assert your own opinions. You shouldn't be the simp husband to your wife. You can still be your own person. I think this is where the archetype for Prince Harry starts falling down. He is seen to be the person that just complies, essentially, whatever is. Maybe it's purely coincidence. Maybe Harry always truly believed this, but it doesn't really stack up in the tabloids when the public perceive this as this prince archetype now essentially just falling under the thumb of his wife. And again, this goes both ways. If this was a princess of the Queen, and she's essentially complying with whatever the wills and the whims and the political goals of her husband, people wouldn't like that because it's distorting the hierarchical structure. Obviously, Meghan is a very successful and she is an intelligent woman in her own right, but Prince Harry, he has the bloodline. For whatever that's worth, it does mean something to the British public. This is, 1,000-year-old institution. It does really resonate with people. It doesn't matter if you're a prince or princess. If someone's walking into your life and you're immediately changing, the archetype starts falling down. So the Meghan Markle Prince Harry relationship has already destabilized the status quo. In 2018, they had the big fairy tale wedding. This starts cementing the archetype again because for whatever has happened in the past, we see the big kind of fairy tale. I think the British population and especially the American population, people think that Meghan Markle is somehow controversial because she's mixed race, but this is a very old thing the royal family have been doing for a very, very long time. If you look at the bloodline, the intermarriages between the various European power structures over the last several centuries, it's really common that a British king or queen or prince and princess will go and marry into the Dutch, the French, various royal families, German, Greek. It's really normal because that is essentially cementing the power structures. It helps avoid wars, helps tie these European royal families together rather than them all being at war with each other. So the idea of Meghan Markle being somehow controversial, this is just a very, very old idea that's just been revamped for the modern era. This could have made the royal family, just cemented them extremely well into the American market as the modern world goes on, as the royal family appear to be more and more of an archaic idea. This really kind of could have cemented the royals in an excellent way that, okay, now you appeal not only to, say, the white middle class, British, slightly stuffy segment, you're open yourself up to, mixed race and various different parts of the world can now connect with the royal family via Meghan Markle and to the obviously very exclusive and profitable American market. There's nothing controversial about Meghan Markle being mixed race. This is just an extremely old European royal family idea. You just marry into various different segments, different nations, different families, and that kind of cements your future growth. So there's nothing controversial about the idea of Harry marrying a mixed race woman, as beautiful as she is. It doesn't. It's just a very old. It's a very intelligent power play from the royal family, in my opinion. Now, I believe the future for Harry and Meghan doesn't continue well. When they could, after the 2018 wedding, they could have, if they had taken more of a backseat role, if the political activism had stopped, if they had stayed in the UK, if they hadn't have broken up with the higher tiers of the hierarchy, aka Charles and then the Queen, I think things could have been okay. They could have just done tours of America, engage with people, engage with like the more of the youth, and different areas of the UK population. Maybe the royal family up until now hadn't have connected well with, but continuing with the political activism and then the bust-ups with, say, William and Kate were huge mistakes. William and Kate really exemplify the prince and princess archetype. Obviously, William has, in theory, assuming the royal family lasts that long, there's no kind of huge political upheaval to the UK constitution system, William will be king. And they have a much better archetypal relationship, that Kate is essentially submissive to her husband because he will be a monarch. Again, it's not sexism because it doesn't really matter, because if the direct heir to the throne was a princess, you would expect the prince essentially to wind his neck in a little bit. That's just how it needs to be. So it's not about feminism, it's not about sexism. It's just about the deeply ingrained cultural and evolutionary psychological nature of what this is. I mean, you look at Prince Philip, the late Prince Philip. He ultimately would always have to yield. He kind of carved out his own little niche in what he wanted from life, because even though he lived in a generation where the man would obviously have, at that point in society, men would generally speak for their household. The man would be at the highest tier of the household. Whether that still happens, arguably yes, arguably no. I mean, there are archetypes spread throughout society, and a male husband and a female wife will have these power dynamics that generally make the relationship work. But Prince Philip, either way, carved out his own unique way of fitting in, because his wife is the Queen of England, one of the most powerful women in the world, commands across the empire, has huge amounts of influence, both hard and soft power. If Harry and Meghan had maybe continued down that route, that Meghan took more of a backseat role, in the same way that Kate Middleton, Duchess of Cambridge, does, I think things could have been okay. Now, you don't necessarily need to agree with how this system works, how the archetype of the prince and princess manifests itself into the royal family. All you need to understand is that it does exist. You can see this just in the way that children read fairy tales. When you read a child a fairy tale, you don't need to explain to them, okay, well, this is why we have the prince and princess. This is why the prince and princess have power. This is why they live in this huge castle and have wealth and things like that. You don't really need to explain that to many children. Maybe some you do, but overall, children just somehow innately know the role of the prince and the princess. They know that the prince carries a sword. The princess is often, is nearly always portrayed as very beautiful, very feminine. The prince is masculine. These archetypes, that's just how they manifest. You don't need to agree with them. You can have your own political ideas. That it doesn't really matter. It basically transcends your own political beliefs, because you can just see how this is manifested over centuries and centuries of fairy tale stories, how it's happened with the royal family. There's an institution that's incredibly old, and that's how these power structures work. Now, I believe the way Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are trying to tweak the system they're in will be at a huge detriment to themselves. Essentially, if they want to be successful, and it's probably not too late for that, they could essentially watch this video and essentially fall into line under what's expected of them from the public, but obviously that's highly unlikely to happen. Try and break the archetypes at your peril, is what I'm saying. It's not something that's going to go down well. I think it's something that Prince Harry, bless him, is a very charismatic person. He's not the most intelligent person. You can look, he's had the finest education you can buy in the West, in the UK. I think his A levels are essentially terrible, like C's and D's, considering that that here's the best private school education, Eton, that money can buy. GCSEs, A levels don't really stack up to saying that he's a very intelligent person. Not that there's anything wrong with that. He's a very charismatic. People really like him, or at least used to. But I don't think they fully understand the dynamics they're playing with. You cannot break these centuries and millennia old archetypes that are so deeply rooted into the human mind. You can't just come along in 2020, 2021 and expect that to change. It won't. And I think this is why they don't understand why such a large percentage of the UK population now no longer really like them. I think probably the tide is even really turning in other parts of the world. They probably do have some support in America, because America doesn't really have this princess thing. So for them, it's clambering. They've got this princess, this novel idea. They're kind of clambering onto it. But I think long term, this isn't going to work out for them, which is a shame, because it could have been so rosy. The royal family could have had this opportunity to marry into the American market and connect in parts of the world they had previously struggled to connect into. What are your thoughts on this, guys? I think trying to break the archetype will ultimately break Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. It's obviously going to put huge amounts of stresses on their relationship, and for this prince to have started off as a small vulnerable child, to rise up to the archetypal warrior prince, and when you hit that, if you have a life in which you manage to hit that high tier of being loved widely by the UK people, by the media outlets, by the tabloids. If you hit that high peak, it's very difficult to maintain. And if you start going down a path where the public start turning on you, that is not going to be good for your future life. He's essentially gone from small child to warrior prince archetype, and now he's kind of fallen off a cliff. So it's a very hard thing to come back from. That's my thoughts and opinions on the prince and princess archetype, how it feeds into Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex. So let me know your thoughts and opinions on this one, guys. I thought it was an interesting story. You can see how there's certain things in the human mind that are very visceral with their relationship, because it's very controversial. There's still people out there that love Harry, love Meghan. I think overall it's not going the right way, and that is because they are trying to essentially break the prince and princess archetype. It's not something I would particularly want to live in. I think they kind of live in somewhat of a gilded cage, and that's something that Prince Harry probably has always wanted to break away from. But it's an interesting one anyway. Love to know your thoughts and opinions on this, guys. This is somewhat of a little bit of a different video than I've previously been doing on this channel, but I really like doing these kind of depth dives into a different subject. If there's a subject you want me to look into, I'd be happy to do that. I really enjoy this type of more longer video. So just an interesting thing. It's a little bit of an intellectual thought process. Thanks for watching this video, guys. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.